In this video, we're going to discuss the accommodation requirement as it relates to UK spouse and civil partnership visas. As an OISC-regulated UK immigration law firm that has helped more than 3,000 partners with their UK partner visa applications, we're very well placed to discuss this. This requirement requires you to submit documentation that shows that there will be adequate accommodation without recourse to public funds for the applicant, sponsor, and any dependent children, if relevant. So when does there need to be adequate accommodation? For out-of-country applications, the documents must show that there's adequate accommodation when the applicant arrives in the UK. For in-country applications, the documents must show that there's adequate accommodation for when the application is decided. This accommodation must be accommodation which the family own or which they occupy exclusively. So if the applicant and/or sponsor owns UK accommodation, this aspect of the requirement will be fine. But what does occupy exclusively mean here? Occupy exclusively does not mean that the whole property must be owned by the applicant and/or sponsor, but rather that there must be at least one part of the accommodation for the exclusive use of the family as sleeping accommodation. Therefore, it's fine if you rent or rely on a family or friend's accommodation just for the purpose of satisfying the adequate accommodation requirement. In fact, relying on a friend or family member's accommodation just for the application is commonly done for good reason. It will not normally tie you down to a financial contract. There are commonly no or minimal costs associated with this, and the friend or family member is ordinarily happy to help you by providing you with the required documentation. However, just because there is at least one part of the accommodation that is for the exclusive use of the family as sleeping accommodation does not suffice alone. This is because the accommodation cannot be overcrowded. When considering whether the accommodation will be overcrowded, we must first consider the number of rooms available as sleeping accommodation, not the number of bedrooms the accommodation currently has. Kitchen and bathrooms cannot be counted as rooms available as sleeping accommodation here, whilst reception or living rooms can. We must then consider the listed number of people permitted to sleep in the accommodation without it being overcrowded. So, for example, if there are 2 rooms available as sleeping accommodation, and there are 3 people that will be residing in the accommodation, the starting point is that it will not be overcrowded. I use the words starting point because when it comes to this table, everyone is not treated equally here. The age of the persons is relevant as children under a year old are not counted, whilst children aged between 1 and 10 are counted as half a person. Whether the persons in the accommodation are a couple and the person's gender are listed as relevant in the Home Office guidance. Furthermore, the Home Office guidance states that the accommodation cannot contravene public health regulations. With this being said, this is not something that tends to be problematic. Rather, it will only really be problematic if the Home Office caseworker has reason to believe that the accommodation contravenes public health regulations. I've personally been involved with more than 3,000 partner visa applications and I've not once seen this to be an issue. The final thing worth noting regarding the adequate accommodation requirement is that the accommodation cannot be prospective. This essentially means that you will be required to provide documentation when you submit the application showing that there will be adequate accommodation in place. You cannot simply state, "We will arrange the accommodation once the visa has been granted." The accommodation requirement is one of the many mandatory requirements that you must meet when you apply for a UK spouse visa. For a detailed account of all of the spouse visa requirements, you can watch our incredibly in-depth UK spouse visa requirements video by clicking the video here. For a step-by-step discussion on the UK spouse visa process, feel free to watch our spouse visa timeline and process YouTube video. Also, if you found this video helpful, feel free to let us know in the YouTube comments by liking the video and by subscribing.